The glass walls of Apple's Cupertino headquarters gleamed in the morning sun. But inside the boardroom, a storm was brewing. Steve Jobs sat frozen, his fingers clasped together tightly as the room fell silent. One board member, in a voice as cold as the steel table between them, said, "Steve, we believe it's time for new leadership." Jobs blinked slowly, as if trying to absorb the impact of the words. "You're firing me? From my own company?" he whispered. The tension was suffocating. Another voice added, "It's not personal, it's business." His eyes, usually ablaze with vision, dimmed for a moment. Decades of passion, sweat, and sleepless nights, all dismissed in minutes. Outside, the company he built continued to hum forward, oblivious. Steve slowly stood, his breath unsteady, pushing back the chair. He looked around the room one last time. "You'll regret this," he said quietly, his voice trembling, not with fear but a fury waiting to ignite. The media pounced like vultures circling a fallen king. Headlines shouted of Jobs' departure, speculating the end of an era. In his Palo Alto home, Steve stared at the television in silence, his face bathed in flickering blue light. "Steve Jobs resigns," the anchor said, amid tensions with the Apple board. But behind that calm exterior, a storm was raging. "They think I'm done," Steve whispered to himself, voice laced with pain and defiance. His wife, Laureen, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "They don't know who they're messing with." He didn't flinch. He simply nodded. "It's not over." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The world believed he'd fallen. But Steve Jobs was already planning his return. Back at Apple, a quiet chill spread through the corridors. The man who had once electrified every meeting was gone. Employees whispered in corners, avoiding eye contact. Some felt relief, others shame. At Steve's vacant desk, a framed quote still sat untouched. "Stay hungry. Stay foolish." One young engineer stopped and stared at it. "He was a madman," he muttered, "but he made us believe." The hum of machines continued, but something vital was missing. Without Jobs' fire, Apple felt mechanical, directionless. The very heart of innovation had been severed. And though the company carried on, a ghost now lingered within the glass walls, restless, unfinished. Steve didn't mourn for long. Instead, he disappeared. To the public, he went silent. But behind closed doors, he devoured books on design, Zen philosophy, and engineering. "I have to build again," he said to Laureen, pacing barefoot across their wooden floor. In those quiet months he found clarity. He meditated at dawn, scribbled ideas through the night. His beard grew out. His eyes sharpened. The pain hadn't broken him, it had stripped him of illusions. What remained was pure, burning vision. "They built a company," he whispered one night, "but I'm going to build a revolution." And from the ashes of betrayal, a phoenix began to stir. In a small rented studio, Steve scribbled the name, Next. He circled it twice. It wasn't just a company. It was a statement. A declaration of war. He tapped the table. "We'll build machines that make Apple look obsolete." His new team, handpicked from rebels and dreamers, sat around him, quiet but inspired. "No compromises, no committees," Steve said. "Just brilliance." The room crackled with energy. These weren't ordinary engineers, they were believers. Steve stared at the whiteboard, then back at his team. "We're not just making computers, we're crafting tools for the minds that will change the world." The revolution had found its spark. The Next headquarters wasn't a polished tech palace. It was raw, industrial, unfinished, much like the company itself. But for Steve, it was sacred ground. The first day he walked in wearing jeans and a blazing intensity. "This place isn't about comfort," he told the team. "It's about conviction." There were no titles, no boundaries, just ideas. Walls became sketch pads. The floor echoed with debate. "We're not building for today," Steve said, scribbling a square computer cube design on the whiteboard. "We're building for 5 years from now." Engineers looked skeptical, But he pushed harder. Art meets technology, that's our edge. He wasn't looking for employees. He was looking for revolutionaries. Late at night, the office glowed with desk lamps and code. Steve paced like a conductor, bouncing between teams, challenging assumptions. It must be perfect, he demanded. Inside and out. One engineer held up a prototype motherboard. No one will ever see this part. Jobs snapped. But I will. He believed elegance lived in the invisible. One misaligned screw, one awkward fan, and it all collapsed. People feel the care we put in, he said, placing a hand over the unfinished machine. Sleep was rare. Pizza boxes piled up. Yet, the team pushed forward, drawn into his vision. This wasn't about just building a product. It was about building a legacy. Even in chaos, Steve carved out discipline. Every Tuesday at 8 a.m., the design review began. It wasn't a meeting. It was trial by fire. One by one, engineers presented ideas. Some were torn apart. Some earned only a nod. Simplicity isn't easy, Steve would bark. It's harder than complex. One designer showed off a new interface. Steve paused. Why does it feel like a machine wrote this? He asked. Silence. Then he walked to the board and redrew the layout in seconds. Design is the soul of the user experience, he said. For Jobs, function was meaningless without elegance. And those who stayed, they were the ones who believed beauty could be engineered. Outside Next Bubble, whispers grew louder. Critics scoffed at Steve's obsession with aesthetics. Investors grew impatient. Where's the product? They demanded. But inside, Steve was unmoved. He walked the studio floors like a sculptor, inspecting prototypes like marble blocks. We're not late, he said. We're exact. Still, the pressure mounted. Finances ran thin. Salaries were delayed. A top engineer walked out, muttering, "Vision doesn't pay the rent." Steve watched him go, eyes steel. We'll do it without him. At night, he sat alone staring at the first Next Cube prototype, touching its edges like a sacred object. It was beautiful. It wasn't finished. Neither was he. Then came the breakthrough. The Next Cube booted up, sleek, silent, with a revolutionary interface. The room erupted in cheers. But Steve stood still, eyes locked on the screen. Now, he whispered, we're dangerous. The cube wasn't just powerful, it was poetic. Its black magnesium shell, sharp edges, and custom OS made it unlike anything else. But it was expensive. Too expensive. Who will buy this? Someone asked. Steve answered, the ones who change the world. It wasn't made for the masses. It was made for thinkers, scientists, and creators. As the team celebrated, Steve quietly stepped back, heart pounding. The cube was real. Comeback had begun. The Next Cube dazzled critics, but sales barely flickered. The price, astronomical. The market, confused. Schools and research labs admired it, but few could afford it. We built a Ferrari, one exec said, in a world needing bicycles. Steve bristled. We don't cater to the average. Still, the numbers didn't lie. Investors grew restless. Journalists called Next a beautiful failure. Steve refused to bend. Vision takes time, he snapped during a tense meeting. But behind the curtain, worry crept in. His dream, so meticulously crafted, was drifting toward irrelevance. In quiet moments, he sat with his head in his hands, replaying every decision. He had built something extraordinary. But was it too extraordinary to survive? Meanwhile, Apple faltered. Without Jobs' intensity, the company stagnated. Products lacked soul. Vision was absent. In boardrooms, suits debated features, not dreams. We've lost our spark, one exec admitted. The Macintosh line struggled against IBM and Microsoft. Customers no longer believed. Apple was adrift, profitable, but passionless. Backstage at a tech expo, a reporter asked, What's next for Apple? The executive stammered. No one had an answer. For Steve, watching from afar, it was surreal. They exiled the fire, he whispered to Lorraine. And now they're freezing. He never gloated. Instead, he felt a strange grief, as if watching an old friend slowly fade from life. Then came the call. Apple was hemorrhaging talent. The boardroom was a revolving door. Gil Amelio, Apple's embattled CEO, saw one hope: buy Next. Reunite with Jobs. At Next, Steve played it cool, but inside, his heart pounded. They need us more than we need them, he told his closest advisors. A meeting was arranged. Steve entered Apple's boardroom again, older, sharper, battle-tested. We're not merging, he said flatly. You're acquiring a future. The board, exhausted and desperate, agreed. With a handshake, Steve Jobs returned, not as an employee, but as a savior cloaked in quiet fury. The prodigal visionary had come home. The media went wild. Steve Jobs returns to Apple. Headlines blared. Crowds cheered, investors clapped. But inside Apple, fear bloomed. He wasn't the same man they'd pushed out. He was sharper, harder. I'm not here to play politics, he told the staff. I'm here to save this company or bury it. Some cheered. Others quit. Within weeks, Steve slashed projects, gutted teams, fired middle managers. He walked the halls with fire in his eyes. Simplify or die, he'd say, red inking anything that didn't align. Apple was bleeding, but the surgeon had returned, with no time for anesthesia. The resurrection had begun, scalpel in hand. One afternoon, Steve gathered a dozen top designers in a stark white room. On a table lay a series of chaotic prototypes. This, he said, pointing, is noise. He picked up a simple, smooth model. This is music. A pause. We'll make one product. One. That product would become the iMac. Bold. Transparent. Friendly. A computer that looked like no other. People will want this in their living rooms, Steve said. The team was skeptical, but they'd seen this before. The man who could will dreams into reality was back. And this time, he wasn't building to survive. He was building to inspire. The iMac launched like a lightning bolt across the industry. Its translucent body and joyful color shattered conventions. Tech was no longer beige, it was beautiful. Crowds lined up outside stores. This doesn't look like a computer, one customer exclaimed. It looks like the future. Sales soared. Apple's stock rebounded. Analysts changed their tune. But Steve wasn't satisfied. This is just the beginning, he told his team. He wasn't chasing profit. He was chasing legacy. We're going to reinvent everything, he declared. Internally, pressure mounted. The company was speeding toward reinvention, but one misstep could kill the momentum. Steve tightened his grip. The revolution had begun, but could he control it? As Apple roared forward, Steve became consumed with perfection. Nothing escaped his eye. Packaging, power cables, even fonts, every detail mattered. Design is not what it looks like, he'd say. It's how it works. Meetings turned into confrontations. This corner isn't rounded right, he snapped at a designer holding an iPod prototype. The room tensed. Fix it. There was no tolerance for compromise. Some thrived under the pressure. Others broke. He's a genius, one engineer said, but he's brutal. At home, Lorraine watched him obsess over sketches, lost in detail. They don't see what I see, he muttered, not yet. His vision was evolving, but so was the cost. Then came the betrayal, one from within. An internal leak exposed Apple's top-secret project, a digital music player. Headlines spilled confidential specs. Competitors pounced. Steve erupted. Someone inside did this, he said, pacing the floor with clenched fists. And I will find them. The betrayal wasn't just technical, it was personal. He trusted his team like family. Now, Suspicion clouded every glance. "No more open doors," he ordered. Security was tightened. Badges revoked. The creative sanctuary had become a fortress. Behind closed doors he sat alone, eyes burning. "We were building magic," he whispered. "And they sold it for attention." This wasn't just about a leak, it was a wound to the soul of Apple. Yet from the ashes of the leak came ignition. The iPod launched with thunder. 1,000 songs in your pocket, Jobs declared, holding it up like a holy relic. Audiences gasped. Music wasn't just portable, it was personal. White earbuds became a symbol. Apple wasn't just a tech company anymore, it was a lifestyle. "We're changing how people live," Steve said backstage, smiling for the first time in months. The product wasn't just successful, it was iconic. But beneath the celebration, he knew the stakes had changed. "Now," he whispered to Joni Ive, "we build the next revolution." The iPod was only the overture. The real symphony was yet to come. That night, Steve stood at his window, gazing out over the quiet Palo Alto streets. The stars shimmered, distant and cold. Inside, the house was silent. He held the iPod in his hand, not as a product, but as a prophecy. "We're just getting started," he murmured. Yet for the first time, he felt the weight of time. The long nights, the pressure, the rage, all of it was catching up. Lorene approached, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "You've done enough," she said. He didn't answer. Because in his mind, the next idea was already forming. He couldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. The revolution had a pulse, and it beat with his name. In a secret lab deep inside Apple's campus, something extraordinary was taking shape. A touchscreen prototype, fluid and responsive, unlike anything the world had seen. "This isn't just a phone," Steve whispered, watching the screen come to life under his fingers. "It's the future in your palm." Engineers gathered, hesitant but electrified. "Can we really do this?" one asked. Jobs didn't blink. "We have to." He sketched a rough outline, a device that would be camera, music player, web browser, and phone all in one. The room fell silent. It sounded impossible. "We start now," he said, eyes blazing. "This is what we were born to build." The iPhone wasn't just a product. It was war against the ordinary. Development was chaos. Deadlines were brutal. Ideas clashed. Screens shattered. "I'm sorry, what were this dull?" But Steve kept pushing. "It needs to feel like magic," he told the software team. "Every gesture must sing." A designer protested the constant changes. "You said to build one thing yesterday, now it's another." Jobs stared him down. "I reserve the right to change my mind, to get it right." People burned out. Arguments exploded. But with every failed version, the vision sharpened. "This isn't about making a phone," Steve reminded them. "It's about reimagining human interaction." His force of will was merciless. But slowly, miraculously, the impossible began to take shape. Then, breakthrough. The final prototype worked. Smooth. Elegant. Alive. Vet. Steve held it, thumbs sliding across the glass with awe. "This," he said softly, "is what it feels like when technology disappears." Toll. He called a late-night meeting. As engineers filed in, he stood at the front with the device in hand. "We've built something historic," he said, his voice nearly breaking. "This isn't just innovation, it's revolution." Silence followed, not from disbelief, but from the weight of what they'd achieved. The team had poured themselves into this machine. It was more than circuits. It was vision, pain, belief, distilled into one object, a single device. Endless possibility. At Macworld 2007, Steve walked onto the stage in his black turtleneck, denim jeans, and that familiar glint in his eye. "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone," he declared. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Then, applause. Cheers. Awe. The iPhone reveal was more than a product launch. It was history unfolding in real time. Behind the curtain, the team watched with tears in their eyes. Years of agony and genius, now embraced by the world. "It works," one whispered. Steve smiled on stage, calm but triumphant. The audience didn't just see a device, they witnessed a turning point in the human story. And it had Steve's fingerprints all over it. That night, Steve sat alone in his office. The cheers were gone. The lights dimmed. Only the soft hum of machines remained. He held the iPhone again, not as CEO, but as a man who had gambled everything. "We did it," he whispered, setting the phone on the desk like a crown. He wasn't smiling. He was reflecting. The journey had cost him friends, sleep, sanity. Yet, here it was, the embodiment of his life's purpose. Lorene entered, placed a hand on his shoulder. "You look tired." He nodded, but fulfilled. Outside, the world buzzed with headlines. But inside, Steve Jobs simply closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and for a fleeting moment, allowed himself peace. The years that followed were Apple's golden age. The iPhone surged. The App Store redefined commerce. MacBooks, iPads, and innovation flowed like clockwork. The world was obsessed. Yet behind Steve's eyes, something dimmed. He grew thinner. His face, once sharp with fire, now carried the weight of time. In private, he received the news. "Cancer. -C. Again." And this time, it was spreading. "I need more time," he told his doctor quietly. But the clock wouldn't pause. He returned to work anyway. "I still have things to build," he insisted. Every keynote became harder. Every breath a little shorter, but he refused to show weakness. To the world, he was still the Titan. Inside, the battle had begun. He gathered his team in a quiet room. No stage. No cameras. Just truth. "I'm stepping back," he said softly. Gasps, tears, silence. "But not away," he added. "Apple is not just me anymore. It's all of us." Some wept openly. Others stared at the floor. For the first time, Steve looked human. Not a force of nature, but a man trying to let go. "Tim will lead," he continued. "He understands the heartbeat of this company." Jobs looked each person in the eye, voice breaking slightly. "You have everything you need, don't let it slip." Then he left the room slowly, as if walking out of a world he had shaped with his bare hands. At home, his world slowed. Mornings in the garden. Evenings sketching in silence. Lorene read beside him as the kids played nearby. He clutched notebooks filled with future ideas, visions he would never see realized. "I just want more time," he whispered one night, tears streaking down his face. Lorene held him close, heart breaking. "You gave the world more than anyone," she said. But for Steve, the hunger never faded. "There's more," he said, tapping the page. "A car, a TV, a school system." Dreams he still fought to finish. His body was failing, but his mind was racing ahead, unwilling to surrender. The fire remained, even as the fuel ran low. In one of his final interviews, Steve stared into the camera, eyes hollow but bright. "I've always believed that death is life's greatest invention," he said. "It clears out the old to make way for the new." His voice was calm, almost weightless. "Your time is limited," he added. "Don't waste it living someone else's life." The words echoed, timeless, raw, and final. The man who had spent decades crafting the future was now embracing the end. "Stay hungry, stay foolish," he whispered once more. A mantra, a message, a legacy. Steve wasn't afraid. He had made peace. And with that peace came power, the rare kind that outlives the body it once carried. October 5th, 2011. The news broke. Steve Jobs had died. The world stopped. Vigils erupted in Tokyo, London, San Francisco. Apple stores became memorials, covered in flowers, sticky notes, hand-drawn apples. Children who'd never met him cried. Tech giants bowed their heads. He changed everything, one mourner whispered. He changed us. But at Apple, something strange happened. Work continued. Ideas flowed. Products launched. Because Steve's spirit had rooted itself into the DNA of the company. He hadn't just built machines. He'd built a culture of belief. His voice still echoed in design rooms, his taste in every product. The man was gone, but the revolution marched on. Years later, a child sat cross-legged on a living room floor, holding an iPad. Her fingers danced across the screen, dragging shapes, building music, asking questions. Her father watched from the sofa, smiling. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. She shrugged. "It just feels natural." That was the revolution. Not in processes or profits, but in the fingertips of the next generation. Steve had once said, "Technology alone is not enough." He was right. The world he shaped wasn't filled with machines. It was filled with creators, dreamers, doers, equipped with tools he forged. His presence lived on in gestures, swipes, and possibilities. Even in silence, Steve Jobs was still speaking. Inside Apple's design studio, Jonia 5 stood before a wall of sketches, products yet to be born. "Steve would have loved this," he whispered. Silence filled the space. His influence was everywhere. In the curves of the hardware, the minimalism of the interfaces, the relentless pursuit of the sublime. A new generation of designers worked nearby, absorbed in the process. They hadn't known him, but they spoke his language fluently. "Would Steve approve?" someone asked. Joni smiled faintly. "If we're asking that, we're on the right track." The ghost of Jobs wasn't haunting Apple. He was guiding it, still pushing boundaries, still demanding excellence. Stanford University. A podium. A speech. Steve's voice echoed across time. "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life." The clip played for new graduates, as part of a tribute. No dry eyes. His 2005 commencement speech had become scripture in Silicon Valley and beyond. Students watched, phones in hand, devices born of his vision, listening to words that had outlived the man. "Stay hungry, stay foolish," he concluded. The screen faded to black, but his message lit fires in thousands of hearts. Not just to innovate, but to live intentionally, fiercely, fearlessly. Steve Jobs hadn't just given us tools. He gave us permission to dream wildly. Somewhere in a dusty garage, two teenagers huddle over a circuit board. Wires everywhere. The whiteboard filled with ideas. "What if it could talk to your car?" one asks. The other nods. "Let's build it." They don't mention Steve Jobs. They don't need to. He's in the spirit of their curiosity, in their willingness to defy rules, in the glow of the monitor lighting their faces. The garage is cramped, cluttered, but it's sacred, just like Steve's once was. The revolution he ignited wasn't about gadgets, it was about freedom. Freedom to invent, to imagine, to build from nothing. And somewhere in garages just like this, it's still happening. A single white Apple logo glows in the dark. No music. No voice. Just stillness. Then, Steve's voice, distant, intimate. "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." Fade to black. The silence lingers. Because the story of Steve Jobs doesn't end. It echoes. In every swipe, every click, every bold idea that defies convention. He didn't just build Apple. He built a mindset, a rebellion in a box. And though he's gone, the world is still catching up to what he imagined. One man, one vision, and an empire of ideas that continue to think different.